If you know me, you know that I value education. It is a very big part of my upbringing, as well as a priority that I instill into my girls on a day-to-day basis. Now, I never thought that I would have the accessibility to private education as I have had since being here on the continent of Africa. And that for me has also just been a great eye-opening experience of the luxuries and the accessibility of a better quality of life. While I also recognize that it is just as important that I am educating my children in home, on things of the world. But one of the things that I love about South Africa is its accessibility to private education, high quality education, and an education that gives children a global perspective. But first, let me introduce myself if you're new here. Hi, I'm Ashley. On my channel, Ashley in Africa, I talk about my experience of moving, living, and doing business here on the continent of Africa. I'm currently in Johannesburg, South Africa, a city that I love, a country that I respect, and I'm looking to move here with my two girls. If you're not new here, welcome back. It's great to see you in the comments. Thank you for all the subscriptions, the likes, the shares. Y'all know how I feel about you. Y'all know. It's deep. It's deep. So in this video, I want to talk about my experience this week. So I've been heads down, really focused on getting the things done that I need to get done in order for our transition to be a bit smoother. I spent all week going to schools. So I did schools tours. And I'm going to talk about the things that I loved, specifically about 3 schools that I visited. But I'm not going to address each school individually because that can get a little confusing, and I just want to make sure that I'm sharing the top things that I loved about all 3. So the 3 schools that I visited were St. John's College in Houghton Estate, Crawford International in Sandton, and Kyalami Preparatory School in Midrand. All 3 are different, like extremely different in many different ways. I'll leave you to do some research, but I'm just going to share with you the things that I loved about my experience in going and visiting these campuses. So the first thing that immediately stood out to me in visiting one of my preferred schools was the diversity. So in the US, diversity is really more of a term and like a check mark than it is an actual way of life. And I love that. I recognized that when I first got to Johannesburg, and to actually see it in play in the schools here was huge. And so let me talk a little bit about that. You guys know that I keep my notes. So here in South Africa, there is a very large population of Indians, as well as Asians, and of course, Africans. Africans are the majority, period. There are whites as well in South Africa, but the majority and the overwhelming majority are Black Africans. I love that. And in the schools that I visited, not all of them, the one that I really, really loved, the majority of the students were African, Black African. And I love to see that. And I also saw that represented in the teachers and the administration and the executive level leadership. It's not just a term, it's not just a word, it is like a way of life. And I really recognize that, and I love that. Totally loved it. Now, socialism is a bit at play here. I don't want to ignore that, but I don't want to go too deep into it as well. So even as I'm mentioning these schools, as you do your own research, they all fall in like different areas and aspects of like social society. And that just is what it is. It's not anything we're unfamiliar with in the West and many parts of Africa, but I do want to put it out there because as I talk about affordability and accessibility, some of these things aren't as black and white, right? So some of the schools had really extreme waiting lists. Some of the schools were ready to enroll, as soon as I applied, but neighborhoods and access to the schools are also probably more in my head because you can pretty much live anywhere and travel to the school. But for people that are looking for a little bit more easy accessibility for parents that are looking for that don't want to have really, really long commutes. You know, where your child goes to school and where you live tend to marry each other, but not really, you know, not for everyone, right? So I know several Africans that commute 30, 40 minutes. Currently, my girls are commuting 40 minutes from school every day. So it's all about your preference. But there are an abundance of private schools all around South Africa. So regardless of where you live, you're going to have access to a higher level quality education that is going to be affordable to you if you're coming from the US. So the second thing that I absolutely loved about the schools, the private schools that I saw here in Johannesburg was the global perspective. So as I spoke about diversity in the first aspect of the things that I love, when you have diversity in a country like the US, but you're not really aware of those cultural practices, the cultural norms, languages, it really doesn't represent diversity. It's just representation. And the global perspective to understand different cultures, different relationships, different religions, different practices allows you to have a level of empathy, compassion, and awareness of other people, other cultures, and other countries, which as the children matriculate and they get older, they are highly pursued by whether it's universities or clients if they want to have their own business, or corporations that are looking for that global perspective as we are currently in a global economy. So I love that. Visually, these schools represent the highest infrastructure and like green space, and it just beautifully, like they're beautiful schools. They look like they could be anywhere in the world, but also looks are and can be deceiving. But the way in which the environment in which a child is able to learn is as important as what they're learning. And that is something that I recognized in all of the schools that I visited. Another part of that global perspective is the language. So the average South African speaks 6 or more languages, okay? And in the private schools, they encourage it. They encourage that at as early as age 3, 4, 5, that they're learning and practicing a local South African language. So while all of the curriculum is taught in English, they're also encouraged to learn languages like Izulu, Xhosa, Tswana, is it right? And Afrikaans. So those are the South African languages that are encouraged in the school space as young as 3. And then as young as 5, 6, then they also add another foreign language to that. Those languages include French, which is highly spoken around the African continent, Arabic, Mandarin, right? And I think there's one more, can't remember. But foreign language is a big part of the curriculum in these international schools. And it has another thing to do with the global perspective and the way of being globally aware and globally prepared to excel in that space. So I absolutely loved that. I also saw an article that talked about the importance of play learning as something that is done globally, but that isn't necessarily practiced in Western education. And in all of the schools that I saw here, I actually saw that at play. And so while sometimes in the US, like we put a lot of pressure on these young kids, especially in this like pre-K program, to be able to meet certain benchmarks, that doesn't have a long-term effect or studies that have shown long-term success in education. And what I saw at these schools here were playgrounds that were like, I'm talking about fabulous, like stretched out. The classroom environment feels more of like a little village, a little town where they have different areas, different sections of play, different areas of green space, the jungle gyms, the playrooms. I mean, I never seen anything like it. And it was a beautiful experience. And I also could understand like, oh wow, this is what they mean for global, like for play learning versus what I'm used to, which is, oh, you drop your 3-year-old in a room and they may go outside to the playground that's this big and they sit in this little room all day. But here it is literally the opposite. Like the room is beautifully covered and trinkets and blocks and sand, and then the outside is like a sand pit, a rock wall, slides, music. I mean, if you go around to some of the newer developed parks in the US, you'll see like the different pods. So, but that is how the play spaces look in these campuses. So I'll get like on a soapbox about that. So let me move on. Okay, and then the last part of the global perspective. So religion options. So in a diverse culture, it's just one thing to say, oh, it's diversity. But every culture has its own practice, its own customs, its own religion. And one of the things that I loved about one of the schools that I visited was that you are given an option as a parent to say, I would like my child to study this religion during religious studies, whether that's Judaism, Islam, Christianity, or just overall spirituality. I love that. I love that. And so you extend that level of learning that is practiced in the household, or you expose your child to a different style of religion to, again, give them that global perspective. I love that. In the US, we're taught to criminalize certain religion practices, and then we prioritize religion when it is convenient for us. And one of the things that they also shared about these religious practices or these religious studies is they celebrate every holiday. So they're not excluding or prioritizing one over the other. So this may cause a little bit of chaos in your family planning or your calendar school year, but it's an opportunity for the kids to have a level of pride in their religion and then be able to communicate and share with their classmates and receive that level of compassion and empathy. I love that. I love that. I literally was warmed by it, y'all. Okay, so the next thing that I loved about the schools that I visited was the transparency. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna list the links below to all the schools that I visited, and on those links, you're gonna be able to see the values of the school. You're gonna be able to see video content of what's happening on the school's campus. You're gonna be able to see fees, all right? So like, there is no, oh, let's be elusive about how much this costs. No, we're gonna talk about it, and you have access to it before you schedule your tour to make sure that it looks in line with what's important to you. And then I love the fact that the conversation around the community of education is not just, oh, the parent and the teacher. It is a trifecta, parent, teacher, child. So it isn't parent-teacher conferences, it's parent, teacher, child. The child is as involved in their matriculation through the school as the parent, and in fact, sometimes more. So one of my friends' children goes to one of the schools that I mentioned. He talked about how he leaves it up to his child to invite him, send calendar invites to school events, testing dates, and whatever else is going on the calendar. And I love that because what I recognize is that encourages a level of independence, autonomy, critical thinking, and preparation for time management. I love that. I love that. And these are not things that I see or hear us talking about amongst each other in the US. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm saying it's just not what I see. And again, like it's just a part of that global preparation for being a global citizen. I love that. Y'all, if you're resonating with this video, please be sure to like it. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking about some of the things that I'm sharing. Okay, so going into that, right, on the level of autonomy and independence, I loved the independence that I saw on these campuses. So 2 of the campuses that I visited, I was visiting during break time. So these schools have breaks throughout the day. Like, these students are having breaks. So it's not just like, oh, an hour or 45 minutes of lunch is the break. Or what I loved at my daughter's school, they had wiggle break, so they would like have a dance break. No, they go outside. They go outside and get to have access to the entire campus. So what I saw was kids going to the fields with friends, kids going to hang out by the trees, kids going to the courtyard, kids maybe going and having a conversation with a teacher about a project that they needed some help on, or kids going to the library. I also saw kids in the music room. They have full autonomy to explore the campus and do what they needed to do during their break while having a snack or while getting something done. I loved it. It was so beautiful. And they didn't have teachers like telling them to go this way in a single file line or to, go this way in a single file line. The children have full autonomy, and when the bell rang, or I don't even know, I didn't hear a bell, it was like they know what time it's time to get back to school. I absolutely love that, y'all. I love that. And the last thing, but the most important thing that I talk about so often is safety. These schools were so secure and so safe. There isn't a need for armed guards. There isn't a need for armed teachers. The schools were completely enclosed with secure gates. You're not getting in unless you have a decal, a pass that says you're a parent or administrator, or if you have an appointment, a scheduled appointment that you're on time for, no later than 15 minutes, you're not getting into the campus. And for what we know that's going on in schools in America, this is something that reminded me of how I am making the right decision for my children by bringing them to a place that not only values and prioritizes children, but values and prioritizes giving them a global perspective and a global international education that's gonna ultimately set them up for success. So if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like the video, share it with someone who would find value in it, and subscribe to the channel. And if you are a family, a mom, a dad, you've got children, you're looking to relocate to South Africa and you need a little bit of help, I'd love to support you in your journey. A link below will give you an access to my calendar where you can book a call with me, and I can help you by sharing my personal tips, even some personal contacts that I've developed in making my way and my voyage out here to South Africa and even to Tanzania, and help you on your journey. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.